was always at $1,000 or less. And there's a reason for that, is that 60% of the people that come into my workshops are using camera bodies that are $1,000 or less. So if I was using say a Nikon $6,500 professional camera body, those people leave my workshops saying, well, Mike's images look great. He's got an expensive professional camera, and I've got a camera that's, $1,000. I'm not going to get images as good as he does. So to prove the point to people that you don't need an expensive camera for macro photography, I've always made sure that all my camera bodies were $1,000 or less. I could use a $500 entry-level camera and produce excellent macro images with it. Now, the nice thing about the mirrorless camera is, as you can see here, it is literally half the size of my D7500 Nikon camera body. And I would never really thought that the D7500 was a large body as far as DSLRs go. But man, when you look at the difference of the mirrorless compared to it, that thing's like a tank now. And it took a little bit getting used to the smaller body. But now I really, really appreciate that smaller body a lot. You don't save a lot on the lens sizes because the sensors in both of those cameras are the same size. It's a C sensor. And you still need the same size lens on each camera body to produce the image on that lens. So where you really save is in the camera body. Now, as far as macro lenses, if you own a DSLR, it's going to be harder and harder and eventually impossible to get a macro lens for your camera. There are different focal lengths in macro lenses, and they come in the low end, the mid, and the long. And these are the ones that are the most common. There are a few focal lengths in between these, but they're rare. I hardly ever see them. These are the ones that I see on a regular basis in my workshops. On the short end would be the 60 millimeter. That would be the Tamron, Nikon, and Canon. Sigma was actually a 50 millimeter. In the mid-range on the low end would be the 90 millimeter Tamron, which has always been a very popular lens. And then in the Canon 100 and the 105 millimeter would be the Sigma Nikon. On the low end of the telephotos was the Sigma 150. And then the most popular of the telephoto macro lens has always been the 180. And Tamron had one, Sigma and Canon. The longest of the true macro lenses was the Nikon 200. Now, when I called Hunt's Photo, which is a large corporation out in the northeast, and asked Gary Farber, who is the vice president of Hunt's Photo, what macro lenses do you offer today? Because I know working with Tamron, they have no macro lenses at all. They have nothing for DSLRs and have yet to come out with any even for a mirrorless. So he had told me that the only thing that they were selling at the time was the Canon 100 and the Nikon 105. And that was because most of the lens companies were discontinuing macro lenses for the DSLR cameras. They're putting all their energy into making lenses for mirrorless cameras. So again, if you're using a DSLR and you think, well, I'm going to get a macro lens, right now there's just basically a couple choices. Now, not to say that you can't still get those lenses that I just mentioned, but you're going to have to go to the used market. You may find a new lens still on a shelf in a camera store, maybe even a Tamron. But once they're gone off the shelf, you're not going to get new ones anymore. So I asked Gary, I says, so what do you have for mirrorless cameras in macro lenses? And this is what he's got. He's got a whole bunch of mirrorless macro lenses. But again, as you see, the DSLRs are going away. So that's, it's not a problem for the people that are in the mirrorless, but again, for DSLRs, if you want to get a new one, you're going to have to forego that and find a used one somewhere. Now in the upper right corner, that is a 60 millimeter macro lens on the camera body, and I am going to photograph this Rose of Sharon flower. Now, Rose of Sharon flower is a pretty good sized flower, and I want to fill the frame with that flower. Now, in order to do that, you can see how close I have to get to that flower with that 60 millimeter. Now, in the upper left side, in the corner there, you'll see that is the actual image that I shot with the 60 millimeter. Now, the image below the 60 millimeter, you can see a little longer lens on the camera body. That is a 90 millimeter Tamron. And in order to get the same framing like I did with the 60 millimeter, I had to back away from that flower. So I've gained some what we call working distance between me and that subject with a longer focal length macro lens. Image on the bottom, that is a 180 macro lens. You can see that's a big long lens. And in order to get the same framing again with the 180, you can see I had to back away quite a distance from that flower to get that same shot like I got with the 60. All right. So why is that important? Well, if that flower was a live subject, say a butterfly, dragonfly, probably wouldn't be too happy if I'm using a 60 millimeter and I'm, a foot away from its face. More likely it's going to fly away. But with a telephoto macro lens, you can see I'm going to have a much greater distance between the camera and that subject and less chance it's going to take off. So a lot of the bug photographers always tended to use the longer telephoto macro lenses. Now, I would say 85% of the people that came into my workshops over the years were using lenses that were in the mid-range, in that 90 millimeter, 100, 105. And the reason why those people ended up in that range is because of the price range. See, when you're talking telephoto macro lenses, you're up in the 12, 13 and higher $100. So a lot of people didn't want to spend that much money on a dedicated macro lens if they didn't do a lot of macro. So they ended up in that mid range because you could get into one for, in the $600, $700, $800 price range. But those lenses work fine. They are, good for shooting live subjects and flower subjects. I don't ever recommend a 60 millimeter outside because you're literally on your hands and knees, everything you're shooting. So tough to work with a 60 millimeter where you have to get in so close. Now, years ago, I'd say 5, 6, maybe even 7 years ago, they started coming out with lenses. I know Tamron came out with the first one that was an 18 to 270, so a zoom lens that had what they called macro capabilities. Now, it wasn't like a true macro lens where it would get in really small areas, but it gets into a pretty small area though, as a zoom lens. Because most people know with zoom lenses, they never really were able to focus in really close to subjects. You might have to add extension tubes to get in closer. So the new zoom lenses of today are designed so that you can do your wide angles and your telephotos, but yet you can still get in really close on subjects and do some close-up photography. So the ones that I use this is the 18 to 400, which I use on my DSLR Nikon camera, and then on my mirrorless camera, the Fuji, I'm using the 18 to 300 Tamron. So what I like about these zoom lenses and using these zoom lenses is that if I want to show an environmental shot, like here where I'm shooting in the swamp, there's some leaves floating on the water that I'm photographing, and I want to show these, environmental shots for educational purposes in my programs. I can always take one of those zoom lenses and put it on another camera, another tripod, set the self timer, go out there and take a picture of myself. And I have 18 millimeters to do a wide angle, so that's really nice. And then if I'm in that swamp and there's some duckweed and frogs out there, I can reach out with that 400 or 300 and capture a frog at a distance. Also, when I'm in botanical gardens, it's really nice because you have to stay on the pathway, and now you have a subject that may be 3 or 4 feet off the pathway. You can't walk in there, but you can take your zoom lens and zoom out to 300 or 400 millimeters and capture subjects at a distance. That was shot with the 18 to 400. That was at the Chicago Botanical Garden. It was a rare day when one of the cactuses was blooming. I think they said it only blooms once a year. So I happened to capture that, and again with that 18 to 400. So you can see I'm capturing a pretty small area. I can actually shoot as small as 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches with either one of these lenses. So that is a pretty small area. Now, I would say 90% of what I photograph is larger areas than 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So it does 90% of the work that I do. I can honestly say my macro lens doesn't go out with me anymore into the field. It's only the zoom lenses. I don't even bother taking the macro lens anymore. Now, the tripod I use is a Vanguard 3 I'm sorry, VEO 3 Plus 263 AT. And what's nice about the Vanguard tripod is it has a center post that will rise straight up in the air. And then when it gets to the top end, it tilts into a horizontal position, as you can see it is here. So it makes it really convenient for getting over top of subjects, whereas a standard tripod wouldn't take you. Now, Manfrotto had a tripod for many years that did the same thing, but the difference between the Manfrotto and the Vanguard is the Vanguard has a little lever right here on the side, and when you release that, that center post will now dip down or raise up higher. So if I need the camera closer to the subject or raise it up away, I can, maneuver that center post up and down. You could move the tripod to the side to get it out of your way when you're shooting your flowers. The legs will actually go completely straight out so that the base of the tripod will sit right on the ground. And with the extension center posts extended out like you see, you can literally put that camera right on the ground. And it's great for shooting subjects that are low to the ground. So this tripod is the best that I've found for macro photography. Now, the other nice feature of the VEO series that came out a couple of years ago was that one of the legs will actually unscrew from the tripod and it'll turn into a monopod for you. So let's say you're going to a botanical garden and they say, well, we don't allow tripods. You can unscrew one of the legs, put your head on top, and they're usually pretty cool about letting you come in with a monopod. They just don't want those legs sticking out where people might trip over them. Now the ball head, most of you probably have a standard ball head like this, which has a big metal housing. And then in the front part, it has a little U slot there. Now, landscape wildlife photographers typically don't use the U slot because they're always shooting straight ahead all the time. But with macro, we tend to shoot towards the ground a lot. So many times you would be working that camera into that U slot, shooting towards the ground, and then you might have to pivot the ball head back and forth to get your framing on your subject. The head that I use is made by a company called Acratech. It's called the Ultimate Ball Head. And you can see they have cut away all that big metal housing, which makes this ball head super lightweight. It's also made out of aluminum, which also makes it very lightweight. Now, the key to this head is really the front section right here. They've cut away all that front section. And now that allows me to move my camera into any angle, any position I need to go for my framing. Because with macro photography, you are constantly going to be maneuvering your camera into different angles for framing. It's not, again, like landscape and wildlife, just shooting straight ahead all the time. We are always maneuvering into all kinds of positions to get framing on our subjects. So that head and that tripod that I just mentioned is the best setup that I've found for macro photography. It can be used for any type of photography, not just macro. It's good for anything, but really shines as a macro setup. Now, the most important accessory, because I do carry a lot of different types of accessories, but the most important one is a diffuser. Now, this is a Dame's rocket flower, and as you can see across the top portion there, the petals kind of look like a pink color, but they're not supposed to be pink. They're supposed to be purple. Now, you might think might have been shot on a sunny day when you might lose some color from harsh sunlight, but no, this was shot on a cloudy day. This is an overcast day when I photographed this. And you can still get enough intensity and reflection off those white clouds that when you're shooting subjects that are running parallel to the sky can wash out those colors, okay? You would assume that you have a giant diffuser already up there with the clouds, but again, there's still enough intensity of light off those clouds and also reflection from those clouds that'll wash out colors on subjects sometimes. So what you need to do is get a 12-inch diffuser. That's the only size that I've ever used in 20 years. And they do make a 20-inch and a 22-inch diffuser, but I found that the 12-inch has always worked fine. I'm usually just shooting single flowers and just need to cover a certain area. So once I put that diffuser over top of that Dame's rocket you just saw, it gets the purple color back. It's the natural color of those flowers. It's amazing when you see the difference when you go from washed out colors on the left to full color on the right side. And that's all I've done was just put that diffuser directly over top of that flower. It's like a magic trick when you see it happen, going from washed out color to full color once that diffuser hits over top of that. On that same cloudy day, I was walking down a trail. I happened to see this leaf. Now I notice on the top of the leaf, it's losing its color up there. And that is the area that is running parallel to those clouds up above. See, the area on the front of the leaf has 90 degrees to the clouds and it retains its color. It's the stuff running parallel to the clouds. So once I put the diffuser over top of it, I can bring that color back on the top. Now it's not quite as dark on the top as it is on the front of the leaf, but at least there's enough color there that I can work in my post-processing to darken down the top of the leaf to match up with the front of the leaf. But if all I had to work with is that image on the left, there's no color there to work with. It would be almost impossible to bring that back. So again, very, very important tool is that diffuser. Now, what happens on a sunny day? Sunny day, I am diffusing my subject 100% of the time. Hear that? 100% of the time, unless I'm using sunlight for special effect like backlighting. But I'm never letting that sunlight hit my subject. And there's three things that happen when that sunlight hits your subject. It can alter the color of the subject depending on the time of the day. Early morning sun has a warm feel to it, warm light, and it can alter the color of your subject. It can add shadows in areas you may not want shadows in your scene. And it can also wash out colors depending on the time of the day. Now, the image on the left, that is a sumac branch, and that is not the actual color of the leaves. That is an altered color from the early morning sunlight. There's also a couple minor shadows in here, no big deal, and sometimes you get subjects where there's a lot of shadows, but uh, it's altered my colors and it has created some shadows. Once I diffuse that, put that diffuser between my branch and the sunlight and shade it, you can see on the right side, that is the natural color of those leaves. If you also notice in these little leaves over on the right here, shadow's gone. So it eliminates the shadows, brings the colors back to the natural color it's supposed to be. And if there's any washed out color, it will bring that back as well. So that diffuser is the most important tool. It is as important as your camera and lens and your tripod. Okay, you got to have a diffuser with you, and that goes out with you no matter what the weather conditions, whether it's sunny, cloudy. But again, sunny days, I'm going to diffuse my subject 100% of the time. Cloudy days, depending on the subject, and if I notice any loss of color, I will diffuse that. You may use your diffuser inside your home. So if you're shooting something like this little succulent here, it has a little sheen in the plant, you know, any light coming at the right angle could cause some little hot spots, little white spots in the scene, and that diffuser will eliminate that. Now, some people will ask, well, what about a polarizer? Can the polarizer take care of some of those? It can take care of some of the issues, but it doesn't work 100% of the time. I tried that with polarizers many, many years ago, and they have to be at the right angle of the light to work properly. So polarizers didn't work 100% of the time, but the diffusers did. Diffuser will cost you less than $15. Okay, polarizers will cost you hundreds of dollars for really good ones. So get yourself and make sure you have a diffuser with you at all times when you shoot. Now, you're wondering if you have to hold this diffuser. Well, you could hold it if you wanted to, or you could buy yourself a clamp made by the Wimberley company. Now, on the left, you see a large clamp, flexible tubing, and on the other end, another smaller clamp. Now, you could clamp that onto your tripod leg as I have here. Now, if I'm shooting in really close to the flower, like I have this little butterfly weed right here that I'm going to photograph, and I'm in really close, so I could attach it to my leg of my tripod, and on the other end, place my diffuser in there. So that would be kind of my assistant when I'm out there. It can hold my diffuser while I work my camera. But let's say I'm using a longer macro lens, you know, one of those 180 telephoto lenses, and I'm 3-4 feet away from that flower. Well, attaching that to the tripod leg, that flexible tubing is not long enough to reach out and position that diffuser over top of the flower. So what Wimberley did was they came up with a stake system. Now on the right hand, you can see I've got um, a hollow tube it is. It's a plastic hollow tube. And on the other hand, I've got a screwdriver. Now that screwdriver is inserted up into that hollow tube. Now, when I want to make it into a stake system to put in the ground, I can pull out the screwdriver, reverse it, put the handle in first, and the shaft of the screwdriver becomes the stake that I can now stake into the ground next to the flower. Then I can take my clamp and clamp that onto the stake, and that'll position my diffuser over top of the flower. So now I'm free to move around the flower and at whatever distance I want to work from that subject, and the clamp doesn't interfere with anything. And the website and Wimberley website for the clamp, they do show this picture where you could attach onto your stake next to the flower and then clamp onto the stem of the flower, and that would hold the flower steady if there's any slight wind on that day. Now there is foam that is inside of that clamp so that when you clamp on the stem, it doesn't cause any damage to the stem of the flower. My camera settings, I have my ISO set at 2000 on both of my cameras. And there's a reason why that, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But you could shoot in manual mode or aperture priority. I had actually shot manual mode for many years where I would set my f-stop and then set my shutter speed for my exposure. But recently I've been just shooting in aperture priority where I'm only responsible to set up my f-stop for my depth of field, and the camera will take care of the exposure with the shutter speed. Now, in my home where I photograph all my flowers is on my stairway. And there's a reason why I'm in the stairways, because that is a 2-story high foyer at the front of my house. And in the very front wall of my home, I have a very, very large window that floods that stairway with beautiful natural light. And so that is the brightest place in my home to photograph my subjects. So that's why I shoot on the stairway. Now, one of the problems with shooting in home is that I've got stairs as the background behind my flowers. So in the beginning, when I started shooting in the home, I was using black fleece and white materials for backgrounds. And so I got a little tired of black and white backgrounds, and I didn't really feel that it would look natural to me anyways. So I wanted a background that was a natural color like I would find out in nature if I shot these tulips like you see here out in the field somewhere, and I wanted to make my indoor photography look like I was shooting it outdoors. So what I did was I went out to one of the local parks near my home, and I had set up my tripod. I'm using my macro lens, and to do this exercise, you'd want to use a macro lens because it works much better than a zoom lens. I have my f-stop set at the smallest f-stop number, so it'd be 2.8, 3.5, depending on your macro lens. Now, I have that camera pointing at some grass, and you could do this in your yard. You don't have to go to a field to do this. You could just find the grass, the green grass on your yard, and do the same thing. But this is the subject that I have focused on. Now, when we are manually focusing with our lens, which is what you want to do, you know that once you get that subject in focus, if you turn that little focusing ring a little bit left, a little bit right of the focus point, that subject will start to go out of focus. So what you want to do is rotate that focusing ring a couple turns to the left and then go a couple turns to the right past the focus point. And one of the two ways, now on my lens, it tends to work the best when I rotate it to the right side. When I rotate it, that subject that you just saw will start to go out of focus. Now, when it gets out of focus and it's a solid color, I photograph it and I end up with that right there. So that grass that you see right there with the lens taken completely out of focus will produce this natural green color that is in nature. And so I can take that and put it behind my subjects in the home and photograph and get the same look I would get if I shot that flower out in the field and blurred out that grass in the background. Now, let's say you're looking at this thinking, well, you know, that's a little bit too solid of a color for me. I'd like to have a little bit of texture in there, maybe a little blotchiness going on in there. So this is a different subject that I'm shooting. So instead of taking it to a solid color completely out of focus, you just leave a little bit of texture in there. So you can adjust it when you're taking it out of focus. You'll see as you're going out of focus how it's transforming into a less and less focus and then to a solid color, but you can always back it off and leave a little bit of that texture in there. And then you'll want to shoot different subject matter, okay? So here's some brown grasses with some yellow flowers, and now I'm going to get more of a yellowish green. If I shoot some pinks, I'm going to get some pinks and greens. And when I'm at botanical gardens, I tend to shoot a lot of the flower beds with different color flowers and then just take them out of focus. And you should have a variety of different colors that you can use behind your flowers when you shoot. Now, let's say that you don't want to go through the hassle of making those backgrounds. You can always go to one of the hobby stores, Hobby Lobby, Michael's Crafts, Joann Fabrics, and in those stores, they have a section for scrapbook people. And there's generally going to be a row of backgrounds, okay, that they use for scrapbooks. So these background books will come with 58 sheets. The one on the left is solid colors, all different solid colors. And the one on the right has backgrounds with a little bit of textures and abstracts in them and stuff. And there's 58 in each one of those booklets, and they're 12-inch by 12-inch sheets of paper. And you can use those as your backgrounds if you don't want to go out and make your own. So these are a couple examples of the ones out of that booklet where you get more of the abstracty look. And those kind of resemble what I'm doing when I take my subjects out of focus and leave a little texture in there. So you can kind of get that same look. Now you're going to want to print these. If you print your own, if you do make your own and print them, you want to print them on a matte paper, all right? You don't want any glossy papers. You don't want, lusters or semi-glosses, glosses, because it's going to cause a sheen on there. If the light hits it at the right angle, it's going to kind of wash out your colors and cause a little sheen. So make sure you get a flat matte paper with there's no sheen on it. Now you're going to want to put some kind of a backing on these prints because you don't want to go, use these floppy prints. You're going to have something to stiffen them up. So you got to use, say, mat board. I've used mat board on a lot of them. I've used foam core, which is the material we use to back prints when we frame them. And also you could try cardboard, anything that would stiffen up those prints. Now you're going to have to attach that print to those backboards. So what you want to do is get carpet tape. Carpet tape has adhesive on both sides of the tape. All right. And then you're going to want to lay your background on the ground and you're going to cut some strips of this carpet tape, attach them to your backboard, and then you're going to pull off the strip on this side, which exposes the adhesive here. And then you can go ahead and lay your print right down on that backboard and it's going to stick really, really well. Now, I will tell you, this is a warning, that carpet tape is super sticky, really sticky. If you go to lay your print on top of that and you got it on a weird angle or it's not laying on there flat and there's a bubble or something, you are going to ruin that print trying to get that thing off there. That's how sticky that stuff is, and you're going to have a mess on your backboard. You're going to have to start from scratch. So just be very, very careful as you go to lay it on there that you get it nice and lined up perfectly and get it nice and flat on there. But once you get it on there, that print will never come off there. It works really well. One of the problems that we deal with in macro photography is always clutter. It's the clutter that's behind these subjects, okay? When we're in botanical gardens, if you're out in the field, it's really tough to find a flower that doesn't have all kinds of clutter behind it. And that ruins our images. It causes distractions in our images away from our subject matter. I have a flower farm that's not too far from my house, and they allow photographers to come in and photograph the flowers. And as you can see, these rows of flowers, the flowers are tightly packed together, and it's very difficult to shoot a flower without getting all the clutter that's going on in the background. So what I realize is that I've been shooting with these backgrounds indoors in my home. Why am I not taking these backgrounds out into the field with me when I shoot? That way I can position those backgrounds behind my subject and cure the clutter, okay? So I don't have to deal anymore with clutter behind my flowers and my subjects that I'm shooting because I'm using my backgrounds behind the flowers. So when I'm out there at the flower farm or if I'm out in the field shooting, I am placing my backgrounds directly behind those flowers, and now I've got a clean background behind the flower. The other great thing about having a nice clean background to shoot behind it is that I can shoot at the highest f-stop of my lens and get maximum depth of field on my subjects. So that works really, really well because my style of shooting is I want everything in focus from front to back, top to bottom, side to side. So I can do that. I don't have to worry about when we're shooting without a background, we don't typically shoot those high f-stops because it reaches back and pulls in too much details on those backgrounds, but we don't have to worry about that when we use one of the backgrounds behind the flower. And that is the shot that you just saw that I was setting up. This is in my backyard. There was a fern that was growing there, and I just positioned that background right behind it, and that becomes my background for my fern. And I can shoot again at f32, get it all in focus, and not have to worry about capturing clutter back there. This is lily of the valley that comes up in the spring, and they are very difficult to shoot because it is so cluttered around the subjects. And that plant that I showed you for holding the diffuser, look what it's doing now. It now holds my background behind the lily of the valleys. So I just really needed the background to fill in this little area up top here. Otherwise, you'd see the clutter of all the stuff behind it. So again, so much easier shooting this way than trying to avoid all that clutter. You can hand hold them like you see here. Most of the time, I'm really just hand holding those backgrounds. I'm up at Madeline Island, which I'll be there in June again this year, and I'm the guy holding the background for the student and the diffuser. When I shoot with my backgrounds, I don't have to get real fussy on filling the whole frame. I can shoot a larger area like you see here, and then I'm going to do my cropping and post-processing. The great thing about these cameras with 26 megs on my Fuji mirrorless camera is that I don't have to be so fussy on my crops and get a perfect framing when I shoot the subject. I can just shoot a larger area and then crop out what I want in post-processing. Same with these lupin. Just place my background behind the lupin and then crop out what I want in post-processing. Another lupin with some couple little leaves there. Crop out what I want. This is the cup flower. It's called a cup flower. And there it is. So again, I don't get real fussy on the crops, as you can see, and I don't worry about the background covering the whole frame because I see what I need as far as getting the background behind the area that I need, and then I know I'm going to crop that out in post-processing. Now the print sizes, as you just saw, I have various sizes that I carry, but in this particular photo bag here, it only carries up to an 8.5 by 11. So, which really covers majority of what I shoot because I'm typically shooting single flowers. But on those lupin that you saw, those are very tall flowers. So I have a 13 by 19 prints for those. But if you carry a backpack, most backpacks are going to have an opening where you can slide in your laptop or slide in a notebook. That area works perfect for putting our backgrounds into. I slide my backgrounds right into there. And in that backpack, like I say, only I can do an 8.5 by 11. But if you have a larger backpack, you could carry larger prints in yours. And then if you want, you could always purchase like a laptop bag, which I have one of those too, where I can fit in little larger backgrounds into the laptop bag, and I'll carry that out in the field with me. Now, you're all wondering, like, Mike, you're talking about F-32. We've always been taught never shoot at F-32, never shoot over F-16 because it's going to cause diffraction, okay? All right, now this is a good example of how the aperture inside your lens at the different f-stop works. Now, most of you probably have a 2.8, maybe a 3.5 on the low end. And when you're shooting a subject at the 2.8, it is what we call wide open on the aperture inside the lens. So it is at the widest opening. Now, when we shoot at 2.8, we get less depth of field at that 2.8. So as you can see up in the pictures up here, you get the guy in focus, but the background is out of focus. So as we go to the higher f-stop, f4 and 5, 6 and f8, 11, 16, 22, you can see as the hole gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it increases the depth of field. So you get more in focus until we get to f32, where we get everything from front to back in focus. We get maximum depth of field at f32. So when we're shooting a subject at f32, the light from that subject is entering into this large lens and is traveling down that lens until it gets to this little opening to the aperture. And now the light is trying to squeeze into that little hole, and it's now creating the image on your sensor. But as the light is squeezing through that little hole, it has a tendency to shift slightly and create a soft image coming out of the camera. So when we shoot at f32, we get this what's called diffraction, and it creates an image out of the camera that is a little bit soft on the details. It's not tack sharp coming out of the camera. Most people will tell you, and manufacturer will tell you, to get the sharpest quality out of their lens, you'd want to shoot in the f8 range, up to f11. Will give you good quality sharpness out of that lens, but f32 is going to give you some of that diffraction. Now, the great thing about digital photography is that we do a lot of manipulating in our post-processing. We alter the exposures. If they're not quite perfect, we can alter the exposures. We can alter the contrast. We can alter the colors in our subjects. We have so many things we can do to adjust those images. Well, when my images come out shot at f32 with that softness of the diffraction, I have sharpening programs to sharpen that image to make it look sharp. So in Photoshop, you got unsharp mask. I think there's another one in there called smart sharpen. I don't use Photoshop much, so I don't know what, I think it's called smart sharpen. Nick Software has a program called Sharpener Pro. Topaz has the Sharpen AI, which is supposed to be a really, really good program. And I use Smart Photo Editor for my processing, and they have sharpening filters built into the program. And guess what sharpening programs are made for? Sharpening your images. So if your images are slightly soft, you can sharpen them. Now, this is a sunflower that I photographed at that local farm. And as you can see, this is a little bit soft on the details. This is shot at f32 for maximum depth of field. I don't go even less than 32 because I don't want to take a chance that part of it might not get in focus. I want to make sure everything is in focus. So you can see throughout this center part of the flower, it's not real sharp. The petals are a little bit soft in the details, and that is that diffraction that's happening at the f32. But I don't worry about it because I know I can crop this, I can do a little color enhancement and sharpen it and have a perfectly sharp image. Okay, so that's what those tools are designed for. Now, if you look at the lines, look at the lines that are created from that sharpening in these petals. But if you look at the original, you can't even hardly see those lines. But these programs can go in there and find all that information and bring it out and make it look real nice and sharp. I have people all the time saying, your images are so tack sharp. You must have a really good lens. I go, well, no, I got a really good sharpening program. Another little sunflower here. This is a shy one just starting to open up. But if you look at all the details throughout here, you'll see it's not tack sharp, and the little hairs on the edge of the leaves here are a little bit soft. But I don't worry about it again because I can sharpen all that in post-processing. Now, sharpening level is a personal preference. You can sharpen it to a lot or you can sharpen a little, okay? I like to do a lot, but that's me. All right. Some people say, well, I don't like it too sharp because that's not what our eye sees. Our eyes don't see things that sharp. And so some people will sharpen a little bit less. I like to shoot and then sharpen a lot. Image on the left, that's a dahlia. It's a odd dahlia. You can see it's got some really cool stuff happening in the petals. But if you notice all the yellow center part here, again, not very sharp. But what I'm accomplishing with the F32 is, as you can see, getting the whole flower in focus from front to back, top to bottom, side to side. But again, I'm going to lose that details from the diffraction. But if you look at the image on the right side, it looks nice and sharp with the sharpening applied to it, and all the petals and everything are nice and sharp. It's a little ornamental cabbage with a little seed head that grew up alongside of it, and I just did some color enhancing and nice sharpening on that. So that's why I use high f-stops, is for maximum depth of field. Now, let me just show you how shallow this depth of field gets when you're shooting with a macro lens and you're in really close to your subjects, because you're thinking, why do you need to be that high? Well, I'm going to show you why you need to be that high. Now, this is a ruler setup, and I'm using my Tamron 90mm macro lens, and I am at an angle to that ruler. I'm not parallel. Most times we would try to get parallel to a flat subject like that, but you may not be able to get parallel to your subject. When we're shooting macro, there's always going to be those times when we can't get in the position we want to if we're using a standard tripod like this one here. So when I'm shooting at that angle and in that close with that lens, at 2.8, all I'm getting in focus is 1 tiny eighth of an inch in focus. That is it at 2.8. All right. That's why 2.8 doesn't work very well for macro photography, because of the fact that it doesn't give us very much depth of field. Now, the image on the right, that's at f32, and you can see now the ruler is all in focus. Now, I set up this peacock feather on the table just like the ruler. I've got my camera lens positioned exact same as I had on the ruler on an angle. And I'm going to photograph this at f8. Everybody tells you to shoot at f8, right? Get the sharpest quality out of the lens. But the problem is at f8, when we're in really close for our close-up photography, we're getting very little of that subject in focus at f8. One little strip across here in focus, that's it. So f8 doesn't do me much good, all right? It's not going to get enough focus for me. If I go to f22, which you would assume that f22 is a pretty big f-stop number, and that's going to get a lot of depth of field, it's still not getting it all in focus, even at f22. So you can see the bottom section here is not in focus, and there's top parts not in focus. So even at f22, I still can't get that all in focus. But at f32, I can get it all in focus. All right. So I'm gonna get some of that diffraction. There's gonna be some softness, but again, I can always sharpen it in my post-processing. So my main goal is I want it all in focus. I shot last year at the Chicago Botanical Garden, went up to Madeline Island, shot up there, and then Dow Gardens in Michigan, shot for 3 days and never changed my f-stop from f32. I used backgrounds behind my subject and shot everything at the highest f-stop. Now you're going to have variable f-stops on macro lenses, all right? And also on zoom lenses. It's not as extreme on zoom lenses as it is on a macro lens. Now, my lens, my 90mm Tamron macro lens, says that on the box, it's a 2.8 to f32, all right? Now, if I'm shooting a good distance from my subject, so this subject is the milkweeds right here, and I'm a good distance from that subject, my dial on my camera will go and stop at f32. But if I'm shooting in closer, like you see I am now, that dial, as it rotates, will go beyond 32 up to 45. And if I'm in really close, it'll go up to 54. And I've actually had it go to 62 on a couple occasions. So these are variable f-stops on the high end and also on the low end. My lens says it'll shoot at 2.8. It almost very rarely ever shoots at 2.8. It's usually up around 3.5 or 4. Because again, as I get in really close, it's a variable f-stop. So when I'm shooting in really close, sometimes I might have it set at 32 when I shoot one subject, and then I go in closer to another subject, and I have to check that dial to see if it goes beyond the 32 and if it goes up higher to get to that maximum f-stop. Your lens may only go to 22. So you're gonna say, well, Mike, mine doesn't go to 32. Well, 22 is the same as my 32. It's the smallest aperture opening on your lens when you're at 22, which will give you maximum depth of field of that lens. All right, this is a book you might want to pick up at Amazon. That's where I got my copy. As you can see, the title of the book is Group F64. Now, Ansel Adams, one of your famous photographers from your state, the most famous of all photographers as far as nature and landscapes, and another famous photographer of that time, Edward Weston, and there was, I think, 7 other photographers. They came together and started a camera club in the 1940s in California. And that group was called Group F64. Now, their philosophy was that we shoot everything in focus, front to back, top to bottom, side to side. And in order to do that, they shot at the high f-stops of their lens. So they were shooting all their images at f64 to get maximum depth of field out of the lens. So here you have the most famous of all photographers shooting his landscapes and Edward Weston doing his still lifes in his studio and that, and his out nature photography, shooting at f64. So if it's good enough for those guys, it's good enough for me shooting at those high f-stops. Now, so you don't need to focus stack because you're going to hear people, and I hear this all the time. I'm so tired of hearing it. Oh, you can only get depth of field by focus stacking. See, because they're shooting at small f-stops and they're realizing they don't get a lot of depth of field. They don't get much in focus. And they think the only way they can achieve focus is by focus stacking. And it's just not true. I've just shown you can do it by shooting at the highest f-stop to get maximum depth of field. There are a few problems with focus stacking, okay? It's time consuming. It's a hassle. Now, if I want to focus stack this flower right here, because I have stairs behind it, right? And I want to blur out those stairs. But in order to do that, I would have to shoot at a small f-stop number. So the idea of focus stacking is that we're going to photograph different sections of that flower throughout that flower at the small f-stop and maintaining that blurred background of the stairs. To start off, before we can do any shooting, we have to do some math, okay? So we have to figure out how much depth is in that flower from the front to the back of that flower. So let's say that flower is 3 inches deep. Now there's actually an app that you can download onto your phone. I don't know the name of it. Someone told me one time on actually one of my programs, and I totally forgot what the name of it is. But there is an app that you can search out. It's a depth of field calculator, and you can download in your phone, and it will ask you how far are you away from your subject. So in other words, from my lens to that subject, how far am I? So let's say I'm 6 inches from that subject. And then it's going to ask you, what f-stop are you going to shoot it at? Now, let's say I think I can shoot at 4.5 and blur out those stairs behind that flower. All right, now once I put in the 4.5 into the calculator, it's going to tell me that all you're going to get in focus is 1/4 of an inch, shooting 4.5 in that close to your subject, 1/4 of an inch. Just like that ruler, I was only getting 1/8 of an inch at 2.8. All right, so now I got to figure out, well, how many 1/4 inches are in that flower that I have to photograph in segments. All right, there's 12 quarters in 3 inches. So now I got to start off at the very front of the petals here, and I've got to put my focus on those front petals, photograph it, and then I have to refocus in 1/4 inch farther into the flower, reshoot it, refocus another 1/4 inch in, reshoot it, another 1/4 inch, and I got to keep doing that till I get all the way through the 12 shots to the back of the flower. Now I'm going to take those 12 shots, I'm going to put them into a software program like Helicon Focus, Zarine Stacker, or your Photoshop will actually merge all those 12 images together. It'll actually evaluate each one of those 12 images and pull out the sharpest part and merge it into one fully focused flower with a blurred background behind it. All right. So a lot of photographers think that you can only get maximum depth of field by doing focus stacking on your subject. All right. I can put a background behind that. So I eliminate the stairs and shoot it at f32 and get it completely in focus with one shot. I don't understand why anybody want to go through the hassle of focus stacking when you can do the exact same thing with one shot. All right. And of course, you're going to have to do your post-processing and sharpen that image, but that's very simple to do. All right. Now, another problem with focus stacking is that I'm indoors shooting, so I got no wind to deal with. Let's say you're outside 10, 11 o'clock in the morning and the wind's blowing. You're not going to shoot 12 shots of that flower and get it to stay in one position the whole time. You're going to ruin the image, to ruin the stacks. All right. So it's very difficult outside to do when you're dealing with windy conditions, which I don't know where you live, but it's windy every day where I live. So it's almost impossible to go out and shoot that many shots of a flower on a windy day. So it's just not it's not needed. You can get it done by one shot. And again, by using backgrounds behind your subjects, you don't have to worry about clutter. All right, let's go to the opposite end of the f-stop and shoot there. Let's shoot at 2.8 now. All right, total different style. I've been showing you how to get everything in focus. Now I'm going to show you how to get it all out of focus. Very, very popular amongst macro photographers. See, uh, soft focus flower photography is very cool. It's very interesting. It looks really good. But I will tell you that my experience over all the years I've been doing this, when I shot soft focus, I never got a good response from the general public. When I was in the art show business for 7 years and I showed soft focus, nobody bought them. And most people were asking why it was out of focus, because the average person, non-photographer, non-artistic type person, is going to use a phone for their camera, going to use a point and shoot. And what do those do really well? My phone shoots everything in focus. It's like shooting at f/32 when I use my phone. I mean, it's amazing. Um, so the people that are out there shooting with their phones and their point and shoots, when they photograph a subject, it gets it all in focus. And so now they look at your soft focus flower photography and they go, it doesn't make sense to me. It's all out of focus. But it is a very popular style amongst macro photographers. Now, there are some well-known female photographers like Kathleen Clemens and Jackie Kramer and Ann Belmont, Jerry Jones, quite a few of them that do lens baby photography. And they use these lens babies to get that soft focus look, okay? And they're very, very well-known photographers. They got huge followings. They fill up workshops because a lot of people want to learn how to do that. But again, it's a difficult to get the people outside of the macro world to understand it. I've had people in my workshops that'll say, I entered a soft focus flower into my camera club competition. And even the judge, who was a photographer, told me that it needed more in focus, and they gave me a low score. But that's the whole point of soft focus, is to have a lot out of focus. Now, a lot of these people will use lens babies to get that effect of that soft focus. And this one here was actually shot with a lens baby. So you can see very little in focus and a lot out of focus. It just really is just shades of colors and shades of designs and things, but not in tack sharp focus like my other images. But I will tell you this, that you don't need a lens baby to produce images that look like this. You can still get it done with your macro lens by shooting at the smallest f-stop, the 2.8 or 3.5, depending on your macro lens. So this here was shot with my macro lens, not with a lens baby. It gives you the same effect. So the way I do this is I like to shoot into the side of the flower because there's a lot of depth when shooting in the side from the front to the back. And I always place my point of focus on the foreground, so the petal that is closest to the front of my lens is where I place my focus. And then with that small 2.8, just like on that ruler, 1/8 of an inch in focus, that's about all you're getting when you're in really close, is about that 1/8 of an inch. And then it'll soften into the flower and soften into that blurred background in the background. So basically, let's go back to this Gerber daisy. I am going to focus on the very tips of the flower that is in the foreground next, closest to the front of my lens, those little tips right there. And I'm going to shoot it at the 2.8, and I'm going to end up with that. So I'm going to end up with the tips in focus, but yet soften into the flower and blur out the stairs in the background, as you can see there. This is a Himalayan blue poppy. Actually, these will be out in about 3 weeks over at the Longwood Gardens in Philadelphia. They are amazing flowers. They're so fun to shoot. But this blue poppy, I'm shooting into the side of it. I'm focused on the petal edge right here. That is the closest to the front of my lens. And then everything behind it softens out and blurs out the background. Now, let's say that I change the point of focus. I always put it in the front because when people look at your image, they're looking for something in focus in there. And if it's in the foreground, it's easy to spot. Now, let's say that I change my point of focus and I focus back in the flower back into here. And look what happens in the foreground. I get this massive blur in the foreground. That's not appealing at all. So that's why I place my foreground is in focus so that you get to see something in focus before it blurs into the background. All right, here's another one. Again, just focused on this one petal that is closest to the front of my lens. And this one here, this is the orchid shot at Longwood Gardens, and just focused on this little section right here. And you can see how soft that gets into that flower. And again, tip closest to the front of my lens and softens into the flower. Now you can change your f-stop to a little higher. You don't have to go all the time at 2.8. You could shoot it at 2.8, but then maybe try a 3.5 and a 4, 5, 6, and you get a little more depth of field into the flower. But if you really want to get that lens baby, really softness, a lot of softness throughout, the smallest f-stop works the best for that. So it's an easy thing to do. Doesn't always have the success rate as you do when you're shooting everything in focus, because you'll get a lot of images that you're going to go, that didn't turn out so well. Once you start really softening down flowers, some of them work out good, some of them don't. One more here, again, just focus on the edge here, that tip there. And this is a iris that I shot. And again, focus on the outer edge here, right on the tip, closest to the front of my lens when I set up. And you can see there's the focus point right in there, and then softness throughout the rest of it. All right, the lighting. I use no flash systems and no light. Everything is done with natural light. And that's whether I'm outdoors or I'm indoors. I am only using natural light. I don't use any flash systems or any type of artificial lights when I shoot. All right. That is my little program for tonight. Now, I have this macro lens that was mentioned in my little bio thing. I started this about 5 years ago, and we are up to over 20, actually, yeah, 2,800 members it's up to 29 countries now. And there are over 280. I got to change that. It says 270. We're over 280 instructional videos that covers 4 categories. So the categories are tips from the field, which is me out in the field actually shooting subjects. And then there's videos on equipment, there's videos on post-processing, and there's videos on composition. So over 280 instructional videos, and the lifetime membership. So you only have to pay one time. A lot of these photo clubs, or the video clubs, you have to pay a monthly fee to them, or you have to pay a yearly fee. Mine is a one-shot deal, 99 bucks. You never have to pay again. You always have access to the videos. We also have a group on Facebook that has about 1,400 of our members that are posting images and sharing their images. And also, if they have to ask a question, they can ask a question and get some help from the other members. If you're interested in joining the Macro Club, go to my website. You see it at the bottom in yellow there. It's tinylandscapes.com. And when you get to the opening page of the website, on the top, there'll be some links, and in the center, will be one that says Macro Photo Club. There's also a link next to that one that says workshops, and that's where I have all my Zoom programs and workshops and stuff that are available. So, okay, gang, that is it. I'll be more than happy to hang around and ask any questions if they unshare. All right, so Kathy, if there's any questions.
Yes. Do you guys have any questions that you would like to ask Mike at this time?
Or did I cover it so well, there's no questions?
I'm one of the photographers who likes to do 2.8.
Yeah.
So I mean,
No, it's a good
sometimes I do
style.
more, but that's my favorite.
When I see the people that are very good at it, I really like it. It's really, really a good style. I did it for years, but the whole in focus thing took over, and so that's where I've had all my successes, the images with everything in focus. So I'm at kind of the opposite end of what a lot of the other ones that teach do.
Yeah, my macro lens I have a Sigma 105. It
Yeah,
only
good
does
lens.
f/22,
Yeah.
so I can't
And
go up there.
yeah, but you'll get the same amount of depth of field as I do. That's going to get maximum depth of field out of that particular lens.
Ah,
So you'll get the same as I get.
We do have a question in the room.
Hi, so you're talking about, shooting so small of a, aperture, and I know you mentioned, ISO 2000. You combine some of that stuff outside, how do you deal with, exposing properly? Do you keep upping up ISO? Because, if you are in a more dynamic environment outside in a piece of land, I'm sure there's some concern about lowering the shutter speed, too low, and
Okay.
causing blur.
Yeah. So if you remember when I mentioned about my ISO, I was shooting 2000, right? And that speeds up the camera when I'm shooting at that high f-stop. Because you're right, if I was back in the days when I was shooting slide 50 ISO, yeah, you'd be getting 2 and 3, 4. I've had 30-second exposures in dark woods, shooting at high f-stops. But that's not the case today, because with these, you know, the ability to raise our ISO up, in my case, 2000, I'm shooting at with no noise out of my cameras. I'm getting like 30th of second shots at f32, even in dark conditions. It really helps out on the low light conditions and shooting at that high f-stop number. So by raising up my ISO, I have no issues with shutter speed. So that's not a problem. I also shoot on a tripod, so I'm just too shaky to handhold my shots. There are people that can handhold and not shake, but I am not one of them. So I'm always on a tripod 100% of the time. But if you were to watch any of my videos in my macro photo club, I have over 100 videos of me in the field photographing subjects, and I'm at 32 many of those times, and you'll hear my shutter click, and it's quick. Okay. So yeah, that's not an issue because we're so lucky to have these cameras that will go up those high ISOs. And I could probably even shoot a little higher if I needed to without any problems, but 2000 works just fine.
anyone else? Okay, well, I
Tell
guess
you what, I hope I
that's
converted some
great.
people to do macro photography.
Yeah, it's a fun adventure.
Oh, it's great.
I do have Andrew has one more thing he wanted to talk about.
Two more things, actually.
What?
One, two, actually. We've got a new member sitting in the room. We want to
Oh,
welcome
cool.
Kevin Eslick. Yes. We have Kevin Eslick with us. I'm kidding. He lives in Lancaster. He likes to shoot people in portraits, landscape, wildlife, architectural, travel, still life, sports and action, photojournalism, wedding, human interest. He likes to go out and shoot the airplanes with us. He knows a lot of our members already. He came to join us. Shoots Nikon, mirrorless as well as old school. He uses Photoshop, Lightroom, Luminar Pro. Welcome, glad you're here.
Woohoo.
Also want to put in a shameless plug for West Coast School that's coming up, June 9th to the 14th. It'll be in Valencia, so that's real close to us here, and it gives us a good opportunity to go down there and see it. We're going to have Photoshop. There's on the screen there. We've got Photoshop. We've got photography, macro photography, and floral. Fundamentals of lighting and posing with what is probably going to be Tim Meyer's last time teaching West Coast School. So if you haven't sat with him, you want to, you owe it to yourself. And then Pete Rizak doing hard light, soft light, window light, black and white. These are all real wonderful programs, and it's close to us, and it's a good time, kind of like summer camp for photographers. There is a informational Zoom session tomorrow night on at 7 o'clock. I'll put the information up on our Facebook page, and if you have any questions, you can also reach out to me. And I can answer any questions you have about West Coast School. That's
Awesome.
all I have.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate your talk.
I appreciate
we
you having
will
me talk.
go out and try new things.
Yes, very good.
That's the goal.
All right. Well, I'll see y'all later.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's all we have, guys. So you can talk till 8 as you tear down. Thanks for being here. We much appreciate everyone who is here in person and online. And don't forget to check out the website to sign up for the upcoming field trips, etc. Bye.
Feel better, Gabby.
Have to find where it says to end. Oh, stop share. There we go.